Let me be clear. This was never going to be an unbiased review of Bayonetta. Also, for the record, I think the concept of an objective review is stupid. I, as a human, am subjective. My review is subject to my personal values and tastes, and are largely informed by the time that I first experienced this piece of art that I'm reviewing. All this to say, when you come to this channel, you are going to get an uncompromised, totally honest review from me. And part of that honesty is me being transparent about the things that I love in games. Bayonetta, as it stands at the time of this recording, is my 6th favorite video game of all time. So in the interest of transparency, I am going to gush a lot about this game. And in the middle of this gushing, I'm going to try my best to elaborate on what it does so masterfully and where it falters slightly, and ultimately why you should not focus at all on what it does wrong, when what it does right is done so right. Alright guys, we're gonna rip this band-aid off real quick. About as quick as Bayonetta over here rips off her clothes. It's not a bad tactic, honestly. Reminds me of when invaded Palestine as a form of psychological warfare. They flooded the streets with prawn, and eventually took over their airwaves too, so that the Palestinians on lockdown, when they tuned into the news, they instead saw
titties.
Lots and lots of titties. This turned the men of Palestine into soft, weak, chronic masturbators. Perfect conditions to subjugate a nation. I know what you're all thinking. Sam, what's with the history lesson? I'll tell you, back in '09, Kamiya-san was the to my Palestine. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a sentence that has never been uttered before. I'm not gonna simp for her design, guys. I'm a married man, and there's already so many videos on this site that already do that. Excessively. But I was 16 when this game came out. Obviously, this form of psychological warfare was very effective on me. If you struggle with a prawn addiction, just know that this aspect of her is core to Bayonetta's design. I'm not criticizing this aspect of the game. That would be missing the point. I truly would not have Bayonetta any other way. Emphasizing her femininity is an interesting, unique way to empower this already ludicrously powerful Umbran witch. Alright, that's out of the way, but before we move on to other aspects of this action-packed masterpiece, we gotta address the devils in the room. Man, I love this dang game. Since it was built on the bones of what would have been Resident Evil 4, it can feel mechanically awkward given the cramped level design and fixed camera. And even though those things don't play particularly well with DMC's slash and shoot style of gameplay, the Resident Evil ghost that haunts this game ends up being one of the game's most endearing qualities to me. I gotta give this game credit for being the devil that cried first. But, admittedly, the gameplay of Devil May Cry 1 has not aged nearly as gracefully as the gameplay in the sequels. That is, unless you're talking about Devil May Cry 2. Devil May Cry 2 is a video game. Nah. I'll say it a little bit more. Dante look cool. He do. Look at that. Look at that coat. Look at that slender. Look at that slender design. It's a hit. He's a hit man. This is a rare scenario where Usually, I'm inclined to try a game before bashing it, but the discourse surrounding this game is so unanimous that I just take it on faith that it is, in fact, a bad game. It's not many times the internet unanimously agrees on something, but when it comes to DMC2, it looks like hell's frozen over. Alright, now we're talking, guys. This is DMC3, considered to be the peak of the series by most of the fans. And even though I've never finished it,
You need to leave!
I think that honor goes to DMC5 for me personally. Look guys, I played Bayonetta before I played Devil May Cry 3. So before you sodomize me with your pitchforks, look deep inside yourselves and ask, if my first experience with character action games was with a game that came out nearly half a decade later than the flawless masterpiece DMC3, would my feelings change given the advancements of technology and game development experience? No? Well, even though my credibility is now horribly compromised, I'm just gonna go ahead and say, you guys are right. This game deserves all the praise that it gets. In my time with Devil May Cry 3, I have experienced iconic campiness, over-the-top incredible action sequences, palpable atmosphere that seems to draw inspiration from the first Devil May Cry, and some of the most intense, flow-state-inducing gameplay ever. And need I remind you, this game came out in 2005. This game was insanely ahead of its time. Definitely gonna finish my copy on the Switch eventually. It's gonna make for a really cool video later on. Like this video and subscribe for more videos like this down the line. Please and thank you. This one's a bit more layered when it comes to the discussion of it. While many fans consider DMC3 to be the best overall, there's a mechanical depth to Devil May Cry 4 that I personally have never hacked into, but I know enough about it to know that Dante in this game is basically a god. The problem is you gotta play through the whole dang game to get to play as Dante, pretty much. The development of this game was messy, so it had you play as this new guy Nero through all the main levels of the game, and then at the midway point, it slams that shit in reverse and you play through as Dante. And while I was hoping that it would look like this, it unfortunately looked like this. In spite of all of this, the mechanical depth to Dante was staggering. Even though you really feel the rushed development at the midway point of this game, it feels so good to take control of Dante once again. And I have to admit, the lead up, the build up to playing as him again really added to the mythos of his character. I love Hideo Kojima's quote from an interview regarding Metal Gear Solid 2, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something like, in order to further develop Snake as a character, I knew I had to shift out of his perspective to show him through the lens of another. I get the same feeling from this game. Dante really feels like a legend, and that legendary status was intensified for me because this was actually my first Devil May Cry game. I'd heard so much about this badass that I had to pick this game up. And by the time that I got to the Dante portion of this game, Platinum leans into my ear and says,
Hey,
Yeah,
wanna try our game?
yeah, I mean, soon. I'm about to beat DMC4.
Alright.
Hey Sam. Yeah. Our game is basically that, but with tits and ass. Oh no. Just no.
I discovered this game through a demo on the PS3's Virtual Store. I must have played that demo through like 33 times at least. I sunk enough time into replaying that demo as it takes to beating that game, and then some. And then I finally bought the game, and even though it was the abysmal PS3 version, horrible load times and technical issues, I didn't care. The over-the-top, utter insanity of this game was unlike anything I'd ever experienced prior. And to this day, it is still one of the most imaginative, bold, irreverent pieces of media I've ever consumed. No amount of frame rate drops, muddy textures, or load times when you hit the pause button. Okay, if you're looking to get this game, do not get it on the PS3 version. But even though that was all I had, it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me from beating this game numerous times. Yes, even multiple times on the hardest difficulty, non-stop climax mode. Because witch time is for pussies. It kicks off with you plummeting through the air on a piece of a broken clock tower, fighting alongside this other sultry Umbran witch. And right as you notice the beautiful, ornate design of their garments, the camera pulls back and thrusts you into the gameplay, where you and this bunned-up blondie start battling against these twisted beings that look like angels. Like a lot. I think the designer of these enemies looked into what the biblical angels are actually supposed to look like and drew inspiration from those accounts. After this absolute spectacle of an intro sequence, it flashes forward considerably. We're then treated to a stylish intro credits scene where the credits are presented on gravestones, the last one of note being director Hideki Kamiya, which promptly gets desecrated by Joe Pesci's peace dream. You're putting your buddy here to rest with some words from the Book of Paradiso, and the agents of Paradiso respond to your call. You phase into limbo to greet them, leaving your portly subordinate Pesci McPeepants, aka Enzo, behind in the waking world, and you begin to furiously and suggestively kick them across the graveyard. Yeah, like I said, this game is rated M for mommy. And your friend here, he pops out with a vengeance. Oh! Dang, Radon, you alright, bruh? It's okay, don't even trip. Just go back to your bar, slam some teenies. You feel alright, you feel better. Alright, let's check on Bayonetta. Oh.
Hey, what you watching?
After her wardrobe oopsie, we see a skin-tight suit made out of her hair formed to her body. And at this point, we're introduced to Bayonetta proper. She is given several guns by Radon and equips them to both her hands and her feet. And naturally at this point, you're treated to one of the most zany action sequences you'll ever see. Yes, she shoots the guns from her feet. No, I don't know how she does that. If that's where you draw the line, I don't know how you got this far, for real. What are you doing? What are you doing sticking around here? You looking for boobies? What, you looking for some boobies? You're sick. Hands above the covers. This is just the prologue, people. The story opens up at this point to reveal that the balance between Inferno, Paradiso, and Purgatorio is starting to topple. Bayonetta, well, she's been asleep for 500 plus years. Cougar-netta, Grandma-netta, old ass. Guys, the story is theming, is set dressing. I'm not saying it's not enjoyable, but one look at this game should tell you that you're not going to be playing it for the story. If that's a deal breaker for you, sayonara, story boy. Different strokes. No, not that kind. You're a fucking degenerate. But in service to the story, the world building and the art direction is on point. Just look at this backdrop for a second with me, okay? Vibe with me. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that nice? I can feel the spiritual connection to the first Devil May Cry and the third Devil May Cry through this gothic Victorian style architecture. In fact, wait, is that Dante? Oh shit, it is. So while the story doesn't do a whole lot of heavy lifting in this game, it does inform the art direction and the overall tone of the game, which does quite a bit of heavy lifting. This art direction extends into the characters as well, who all benefit from the exaggeration that anime affords. And this rose gold sort of sheen covers the game, even 500 years after the events of the prologue. Another area that really carries some weight is the sound direction of this game. And if you're familiar at all with Platinum, you know that every punch, kick, gunshot, and guillotine slaps is thick, is girthy. There's so much going on in this game at any given time, and yet each action feels so weighty and just impactful. And it is easy to miss this insane level of polish in the sound design with this bumpin' ass soundtrack by Takahiro Izutani. Kamiya says to him, he says, hey guy, I want to close my eyes and I want to see a hot chick kicking ass. Izutani's like, I got you, fam. Listen to this J-pop rendition of Fly Me to the Moon and tell me that that's not exactly what you see. And I'll admit, I don't really listen to this type of thing in my free time, but I don't necessarily want sad bastard Radiohead type music to be playing during this high-octane action game featuring a lollipop popping witch. Izutani, you nailed it with these jams, brother. And Hiroshi Shibata, my guy, teach me. I am in awe of the combat of this game. The way it feels. Devil May Cry laid the groundwork for the gameplay of this game, but the way that Bayonetta moves in comparison to Dante is probably why I never finished Devil May Cry 3. I'll just say it. Dodging by holding the lock on, moving laterally, and hitting the jump button, shit's for the birds. In Bay, you just hit R2. If you dodge at the perfect moment, you get witch time, slows everything down, gives you some free hits. This, along with other streamlined elements, really smooth out the gameplay in comparison. It makes it feel feminine. She feels like a cat, slinking and sliding out of harm's way all the time. And thankfully, the enemy's aggressiveness is cranked up in this game. With the increased agility and evasiveness of Bayonetta, it's important to balance this out with really aggressive enemies, and they nail it here. These enemies are ferocious, particularly in the final chapters. Remember that witch time? Remember that witch time I was talking about? Gone, bitch. And this is on normal difficulty. There are some enemies that are not affected by witch time. That's where the rosary beads come in, where a perfect dodge is an offensive attack against them.
P.S. This really comes in handy on the non-stop climax difficulty where you can't use witch time. You remember what I said earlier? Witch time's for pussies. It's for pussies, you gotta use it.
One of the most satisfying things you can do in this first installment of the Bayonetta series is the punish combos. There are torture attacks that you get when your magic gauge fills all the way up, but we're not talking about those right now. I'm talking about the attacks that happen mid-combo where you hone in on one enemy and make things personal. It might not be the most practical way of doing things considering how many enemies you're typically supposed to dispatch in this game, but all I'm saying is, give me the option. You can dodge out of this at any time if you see another enemy trying to attack you, but just this perspective shift when the camera zooms in on you just humiliating one enemy, I want that. There's another super cool move that involves a perspective shift where you're just shooting all around you. It's called Bullet Climax. And the only thing I'd say is that it needs to do a tad bit more damage to make it viable. I understand that these methods are not the most efficient ways of dispatching enemies, but sometimes the badassery outweighs the efficiency, if that makes any sense. Replayability. Guys, I already told you, I've beaten this game several times on the hardest difficulty. Do I gotta say more? Alright, if I gotta. Not like this video's not long enough yet. So if it's not enough that you have 4 guns on you at any given time, you can also switch your limbs out with different weapons. And I'm not going to show you any of them. I know that this game is over a decade old, but still, if you can experience the expansion of her repertoire blind, that'll bless your soul. In addition to these extra weapons that you can get, you also have techniques you can learn, more costumes, awards. There's even extra fights hidden away in the levels that are easy to miss if you don't keep your eyes open. This game, while linear, rewards exploration. I feel like I've been jerking this game off for the whole discussion, so I'm gonna point out some glaring issues that a lot of people have with it. Like I said before, the story didn't necessarily change my life from a writing perspective. I'm not saying it won't change yours, but from where I'm sitting, it's not extraordinary. It's not bad, but it kind of fits the game. There's another part of this game that is just an objective flaw. It's the QuickTime events, the QTEs. They're a problem. They're a real problem. They're gonna pop up in the middle of scenes where you do not see them coming, and it's gonna halt your progress. You're gonna have to play the whole scene over again. It's super annoying. But once you kind of catch on that they're gonna happen, you'll be on your toes and hopefully catch them as they come. I guess if I'm nitpicking, maybe the color palette feels a bit washed out at times. Although the rose gold palette kind of separated it from the pack back in 2009. Another thing in this game that people take issue with are the bigger boss fights. I feel that the argument against them is that they mechanically suffer due to their stature, but in my opinion, the sheer spectacle of these fights make up for any loss in mechanical depth as far as the combat goes. One last thing is that I guess there are some short little puzzly parts of this game that have nothing to do with action and are kind of baffling, but they're gone the second they arrive, pretty much. Guys, I think you got the gist at this point. Bayonetta is unmatched in its fun character action gameplay, unless you're talking about maybe DMC 5, which you could have an argument there, and I'll definitely be making a video about that, do not worry. But for my money, the visceral combat, tongue-in-cheek tone, and some of the most over-the-top scenarios that you'll experience in a game, well, I guess Dante himself put it best.
Don't fuck with